Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for logging in for such late in the day. So my name is Drew. I'm the president of Greater Houston REIA. I'm honored to have our special guest for tonight, and she's going to be our speaker at our main meeting also. Her name is Maria Giordano. Hope I got that right. Correct me if I didn't. Thank you. So she's a former trauma nurse, so hooray. And then she's been in real estate for 2 decades. Is that right? And then she specializes in marketing, negotiation, and creative structure. If I left out anything, I'm sure she'll clarify with everyone, but I'm not going to take any more of her time. So Maria, take it on.
Thank you so much for having me on here. And tonight, I think we're just going to talk about marketing and how we market to find creative deals, and even more specifically, subject to transactions that we've heard a lot about. And I don't think I'd be where I am today without real estate. I grew up in a family of real estate investors back before there was this thing called the internet. And I've seen a lot of the mistakes along the way that my parents had made. I have seen how bad adjustable rate mortgages are, as some of the multifamily people are seeing right now. I was a very small child back in the 80s when rates adjusted from what's a typical normal of like 6.77% to over 18%. So we think our interest rates are bad now, which kind of brings me to, why is everybody talking about creative deal structuring, and more importantly, subject to deals? So I guess if I can have you guys put in the chat box, or open this up to discussion on, why is it that these subject twos and these creative strategies are so valuable to us? Anybody know why? What is it that we're looking for on these? We want the lower rates, exactly. And that is what makes them so valuable, because typically right now, if you're an investor and you have to go out and get private money, hard money, or just plain old bank financing, and you're trying to buy cash flowing assets, it's really hard to do that and make those properties cash flow with current interest rates, especially when you're looking at investor rates that are north of 8%. You're looking at 9, 10, and then getting into hard money, and they're much higher than that. And so rental properties, being a housing provider and stuff like that, doesn't cash flow. The other thing that I like to go after when I'm looking at subject to properties is I like to say I'm a reformed flipper. My husband and I used to do like 6+ flips a month. Problem with fixing and flipping is typically, you flip that property, it pays you once, whereas cash flowing assets is really how you create long-term wealth, because it's like rinse and repeat every month. It keeps paying you ongoing. Well, every once in a while you find a deal that is amazing, and if you're able to pick it up as a subject to, and it needs a lot of work, like say it's a rehabber that was first time, didn't know what they were doing, picked it up at a low interest rate, and now it's been just sitting for the last couple of years, I'm able to pick up those properties subject to as well. And I can either flip it, or I can put some money into it and keep it as a cash flowing asset. So even if you're looking to do fixing and flipping, you can pick up those properties subject to as well. So let's start with, what type of people do I have on here? How many of you are, I guess, wholesalers, fix and flippers, landlords, that kind of stuff? Let me see, so I kind of get an idea of what I've got here. Okay, so I've got a wholesaler there, a landlord, more fix and flipper, landlording. Okay, so we've got a pretty good midterms, rentals. Yep. Okay, so we've got a pretty good selection of people tonight. And I've also, when I first started out doing real estate investing, our very first property was actually an Airbnb over gosh, going back like over 15 years ago, before Airbnb was actually a thing that it is today. I didn't think of it as real estate investing. To me, real estate investing back then was, you're fixing and flipping, you're wholesaling, or being a landlord. So when we first got started, we were actually doing the Airbnb thing. So I'm very well versed in that. And Airbnb is another great strategy if you're in an area that isn't changing the laws and the HOA rules and all that kind of stuff on Airbnbs. But even if you're doing Airbnbs, you still want to be able to pick up these properties at what the lowest amount will make every month, which would be a long-term rental. And so that is, again, where the subject twos come in, because at 2.5%, 3% interest rates, heck, even 4 or 5, you can cash flow these properties a heck of a lot more than if you are doing, your typical 8, 10% or whatever financing with the bank. The other thing is, so I'm sure many of you know, banks don't like entrepreneurs, and they really don't like to lend money to real estate investors. And part of the reason is we like to pay ourselves, or show that we're paying ourselves as little as possible on our taxes. And banks want all these statements, and so they want you to pay yourself more. So that's another good thing about subject to deals and creative strategies, is that there is no bank qualifying. So let's talk about how I look at the marketing end. Now, for those of you who are going to be there on next week, Tuesday or Saturday, depending on which REIA you live by, I am going to give you, for just showing up that night and listening to me, my marketing letter. It's my highest performing marketing letter that I send out. I believe that one of the best strategies still is direct mail, but in order to get that high, super high response rate, and I've had as high as a 27% response rate, which is unheard of on that letter, it comes down to pulling a very precise list. And that's what I'm kind of going to talk with you about tonight. And then next week, Tuesday or Saturday, depending on which REIA you're in, I'm going to give you that actual letter so that you can have it, take it home, and use that. So let's get started. What are some of your troubles that you guys are having with your marketing? Can I see some of that in there? And how many of you are even going after the creative deals or the subject twos? Responses, okay. Anybody else having issues with their marketing? I'm assuming if you're on this webinar tonight, it's because you're all having issues with your marketing. Well, one of the main thing is, okay, somebody else is just getting started. So one of the main problems with people having lower response rates is the fact that you're not pulling a targeted enough list. And for those of you who are wanting just to go after the creative deal structuring type of seller, the seller with the real estate problems, who are very desperate and motivated to sell it on something like a subject to, is you can't just pull a broad list. You have to start thinking of who is your seller avatar. And I want you to write this down. So start thinking of what are the real estate problems that somebody who's going to sell on a subject to is going to have. Most of the time you're hearing people say, well, just pull a list of out-of-state absentee owners and that kind of stuff. Well, I lived in Arizona for 18 years. I only moved out to Pennsylvania about 4 or 5 years ago. And when I was living in Arizona, and actually most parts of the country, what do we call an out-of-state absentee owner? And I'm sure it applies down in Texas like it does in Florida and Arizona as well, is an out-of-state absentee owner where I was a snowbird. Chances are it doesn't equal motivation. So when you're starting to look at who are your motivated people, and yeah, okay, that's right. You're divorced, you're deathless. It sounds bad saying you're deathless, but you're probateless. People who have owned the property for more than 10 years. Landlords. My number one list, and you should write this down, are your landlords. Why are landlords so important? Well, I want to narrow that avatar down to who are my most motivated of landlords. So after COVID, especially, I was getting tons of leads from my landlord list because I was stacking those lists. So when we start talking about our avatar for our landlord, think about it. You want landlords who have typically owned their property for more than 5 to 10 years. I prefer actually more than 10 years. You want them to have, you know, it can be slightly negative equity, but I really don't want more than 5 to 10% negative equity in there if I'm buying subject to. I'm looking at also, I want properties that have the lower interest. So I'm pulling people who have financed their property 3 years or more ago. I don't want anything that's been done in the last couple of years, because what have we seen in the last few years? The interest rates have gone up. So if I'm trying to attract the most motivated sellers, I also want them to be ones that can really cash flow. So when I'm looking at landlords, it's they have a property, they've owned it typically for more than 10 years. They have, you know, equity in that property. You know, it can be, like I said, some slightly negative equity. I want a mortgage on there that is typically less than 5 or 5.5% interest. So it's got to cash flow as a long-term rental, and that's very important. And then I'm looking for properties that meet that typical 3-bedroom, 1-bath, or 3-bedroom, 2-bath and up kind of criteria. I'm not going after my $1 million homes. And I get some of you are thinking, well, if you're doing an Airbnb, that's different. I'm not really going to talk that much on Airbnbs, but for your typical, you know, 80% of who's out there looking to be a rental property, I want to go after those kind of properties. So I'm going after the landlords who, again, now write this down, who own the property typically for more than 7 to 10 years, who have financed it 3 years or more ago, meaning their mortgage is 3 years or older on there. They can have a little bit of negative equity. And I stack that. So now I start looking at what type of problems do they have. Well, if the property is greater than 20 years old, chances are it's got some neglect or it needs some repair work. I'm going to stack it with that. I'm going to also stack it with an eviction list. So landlords who've had evictions. What I found out, especially during COVID, is they're afraid, even if they've had good tenants in there, they're afraid of their next tenant. If they've had an eviction, they're really frightened about who is that next tenant going to be. So I like the eviction list. I'm going to stack it maybe with code violations as well. So when I'm talking about stacking my lists, there's different ways you can pull those lists. A lot of times you can use List Source. I also use a monthly subscription called PropStream. There's tons of different ones out there. But for things like eviction lists, code enforcement, you can pull that from your county. So you can go and get that. Certain areas of Texas, because I've done these lists in Texas as well, you don't even have to show up at the courthouse. You can just go in and pull it off of the county website. And it varies by county on that. So I'll do that. Then what I'm doing is I'm combining those spreadsheets. So I'm taking the tired landlord, the eviction list, made the code enforcement list, and I'm combining them into one list. And then I'm looking for the matches, and I'm kind of have a numbering system. So if it's a 3-point list, people that only show up on one get a 1, people that show up twice get a 2, and people that show up 3 times get a 3 on there. The 3, or the higher they rank, the more motivated that seller is going to be. So think about that. You can also, if you don't want to do eviction, you can do it tired landlords who have vacant properties that are out-of-state owners and have a code enforcement or a code violation on there. So there's different ways that you can stack these lists. Behind that in their taxes is a great one as well. You're not going to find it as much typically on your subject to properties, because most banks impound or escrow the property taxes. But if you have a bank that's not, that's another great one. So I'm really diving down into what is that seller's motivation. And then you're going, oh, I froze. Am I frozen, guys? No. Okay. So it's my husband. Okay, good. Thank you. Also, my husband popped in and said, you're frozen. So, okay. So when you're doing that, you're going to then create your list. I like to mail merge it. You can also use other CRMs or whatever that'll take care of it. I also use a VA who does it all for me. Mail merges it, set it and forget it. Somebody had mentioned skip tracing. I like to use your typical number 10 business envelope. I have somebody who hand addresses the envelopes to that potential seller. I use my return address. Why don't I use my office address? Because I want it to look as least like a business as possible. I also brand my stuff. So my envelopes, I like Tiffany blue. What woman doesn't like Tiffany, right? And so all my envelopes are Tiffany blue. I don't want it to look like it's coming from a corporation. And this is really important because my first point of contact with that seller is I want them to open it. That's key in getting my message across to the seller, is getting them to open that marketing piece. So that's where the handwritten envelopes come in handy. When I was first getting started, I was broke. I didn't have money. Market had crashed, all that kind of stuff. I was struggling nurse, single mom, all that kind of stuff. So I had my kids help hand address the envelopes. I was doing it. We're making use of those small little chunks of time. As I got going, I went on Craigslist and I put an ad out there for people who wanted work from home. When I worked in a factory as an 18-year-old, we called it piecework. So people who wanted to get paid on piecework. And so they would hand address my envelopes for me. And then I would put a stamp on it that wasn't your typical American flag stamp. I love the American flag. I think it's a very beautiful flag, but I wanted something that was more personalized, more different. So I loved using like Disney stamps, like Buzz Lightyear. My son right now is really into, my youngest, my 9-year-old's into dinosaurs. So I'll stick a T-Rex stamp on there. Nobody else is doing that. That creates curiosity. Somebody asked me if I'm afraid people knowing your address. I have always used my home address. I am not worried about people knowing where I live, checking me out, anything like that. I've never had a seller stop by my house. I've never had, no. My landlording business, I'm of course using my office, but even still, I've never had somebody stop by my house. Occasionally I'll have somebody who might, and I had this happen when I was doing some out of state stuff. I had a guy who Googled my house, and because I live in central Pennsylvania, I'm surrounded by a lot of trees and stuff. And he thought that where I lived was bogus because all he saw were trees. He didn't see my actual house. But no, I'm not worried about it. So I first thing is you got to narrow your niche down. Come up with your avatar, get the most motivated, and then mail the mailing piece I'm going to give you in an envelope that looks different. So the first objective is to get the seller to open it. Pull your list to get the seller to open the letter. And then from there, it's how you write it up, what sticks out, because people are going to scan your letter, and you'll get that on Tuesday and Saturday next week. The next thing is when I'm looking for, so some of you are thinking, I don't have a lot of money. I don't want to do your typical direct mail. Now, the other reason why I like direct mail is it's not debt. If you think about how many emails you get in a day, how many are like me, you get over 100 plus emails a day. It is so easy. It's like delete, delete, delete. And you're just going down. And if you're like me and you own a lot of properties, you're also getting a lot of text messages, and I'm just like spam, spam, spam all the way down. It doesn't attract me. So I'm always looking at now what's going to attract me as a landlord to open something. Well, when you go out to your mailbox, how many letters do you have a day? Some days I have like 1 or 2. Other days I might have 4 or 5. But the amount of direct mail I have is so much smaller than when I was first getting started. When I was first getting started in this business, I was competing anywhere from 15 to 20 other mailing pieces people would get a day. Now they just don't have that. The other reason why I like direct mail is because if the letters don't make it to the seller, meaning I'm mailing them to their where their tax record or their tax card shows them. So whoever is getting their taxes, that's the address I'm mailing it to. If that doesn't get delivered, the mailman is going to put a return to sender on that. Now I can skip trace that seller. Nobody else is skip tracing. And the ones that are tracking down these sellers. And think about if, 1 in 100 are skip tracing, you have just knocked out 99% of your competition by being that one person that skip traces where that seller is. And by skip tracing them, again, it's going after the most motivated. So always skip trace. So when you're sending out that letter, you get the return to senders back, skip trace them. You can also create a driving for dollars list from those return to senders and get out of your car, knock on the doors, find out where people are. That's where the money is on these properties. So think about that. I'm also setting it up, my campaigns up, so it's getting done every single month. And by getting the most motivated sellers, you don't need huge lists. I only mail probably, anywhere from 250 to a big list for me is 450. And I live in a smaller area. Even in Phoenix, where there's a ton of competition, I don't do a ton of mailings because I'm going after the most motivated. And by doing that, I'm getting as high as a 27% response rate. The other thing you can do with your direct mail is you can skip trace it and get their phone numbers. So when I'm sending out a mailing campaign, I might have one of my staff then 3-4 days after sending out that letter, call them. And I'm just calling them, finding out if they got my letter, that I'm interested in buying their place. That again brings up your response rate. And what you have to remember is that over 90% of your deals are going to come after the 5th, 6th, 7th touch. So that's why you have to keep mailing them over and over every single month until they tell you to stop or they fall off your list. And by fall off your list, it means that the title has transferred. Does that make sense, everybody? I think that it doesn't see any questions. Okay. Perfect. Then the next thing that I like to go after are wholesalers. I love working with wholesalers, and this is something I'm not seeing anybody else out there doing. So if you're a wholesaler, this is perfect for you. As a wholesaler, you're typically having to go out and get properties that are, your low cash offer. Most wholesalers are using, 70% of the after repair value minus the repairs that need to be made. And then you're subtracting your wholesale fee from that. So if a property's after repair value is $100,000, you take 70% of that and you're at $70,000. Now, so you have $20,000 in repairs, you're at $50,000. And then you want to get a $10,000 wholesale fee in there. So you're at like $40,000. Well, if the seller is like, hey, I owe too much on this property, or there's no way I'm going to accept that, you just kind of put that aside, might follow up to wait and see if they're desperate or whatever. But if they owe too much, they may not be willing to sell for that low cash price because they have to come in with money or they have to do a short sale or something like that. So this is where I work with wholesalers that are new or are unfamiliar to creative deal structuring. And I say, hey, listen, if you come across a motivated seller that low cash offer isn't going to work for them, give me a call, find out if they might be willing to do some type of a creative strategy so I can help them out. And that's when I come in and I start talking to them about doing a subject to deal, about doing a wraparound mortgage, or about doing a straight out seller finance. And if they own it free and clear, I can do a seller finance deal where I give them more money and I'm paying them every month on terms. Now, I don't have any interest in those typically. If it's somebody who owes too much on their property and say it doesn't need a ton of work, or it would need a lot more because it's dated if it was going to be flipped, but it does not need that much work for a landlord to own it or to be a housing provider, I can generally, as long as I can cash flow. Now, this is key. Write that down. Cash flow is key on these type of properties. As long as I can cash flow that property, I can take it over subject to, get the seller out of it, and put a nice family in that property. So wholesalers have been a beautiful thing for me. And I've really switched over to utilizing a lot of my wholesalers in my area. And the nice thing is then, well, what's in it for the wholesaler? Well, what does the wholesaler want? I can give them a finder's fee for it. If it's a really good property, I might be able to give them a few $1,000s for it, more than what they'd get if it was just sitting there. Maybe I can do a wraparound mortgage with them and cut them in and give them a percentage of the profits every month. So there's all of these different strategies that you can do to help out the wholesalers, get them money, and help the seller with their real estate problem. The thing is that in order to make these deals work, the key is to get in front of the seller. Once you get in front of the seller and you ask questions, I mean, all negotiations is asking questions. Once you start asking them questions to really understand what their problem is, what their motivation is, what their pain points is, and then see if there's a way that you can structure it to help them. Same with the wholesaler. If you start talking to the wholesaler and find out what they want and if you can make things work, or hey, if they're thinking that they're going to get $20,000 on this property as a wholesale fee, and you're like, there's no way this thing's only cash flowing $500 a month, dude, I'll give you a couple thousand or I'll cut you in on it. Do you want a small piece of the pie or do you want 100% of nothing? Because 100% of nothing is still nothing. So that's the conversations that I start having with these wholesalers. Does that make sense? Let me see if you guys understand the wholesalers. Cool. Any other questions on that? Because I usually get a lot of people who have questions on how do you work with wholesalers or how do you talk with wholesalers? And you guys, if you can unmute yourself, you can go ahead and do that. That's fine too. You guys all good? Don't be shy, exactly. You guys are such a shy group tonight. Oh, you guys are muted. Okay. I did not know that. The other thing, I think you guys have access to raising your hand. So if you have a question, you can also raise your hand and I think we can unmute you. Is that right?
I think, yeah, because I can't unmute. I can't unmute everybody. I think if you just put in the chat, then I can relay your questions also.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Anybody have any questions on anything I want? And I apologize. I didn't prepare like your typical PowerPoint because I didn't want to do death by PowerPoint. There'll be time for that on Tuesday. Okay. Okay. So the third way that I really like finding motivated sellers is through social media. Can I role play a typical conversation with wholesalers? Yeah, so I just did one with a wholesaler. So with wholesalers, what it is I start asking them, you know, do you have a lot of people who say no to them? And they're like, yeah, of course I do. I said, well, do you have people who maybe owe too much and can't sell or they're stuck on their price? And they're like, well, yeah, all the time. I said, well, how many of these people do you think would be willing to look at a creative option? Have you ever tried something like that? And then usually your wholesalers want to know, well, how would something like that work? Just like your realtors out there, and I train a lot of realtors, wholesalers as well want to know, how do I get paid? Because they're spending all of this money on their marketing that isn't paying them if they can't close the deal or they can't wholesale the deal. So typically they have a ton of, motivated sellers, but only a few that are willing to take the low cash offer. But instead, if you talk to the wholesalers and say, listen, your sellers are, I'm sure many of them are, stuck on price. Probably some of them have mortgages that would cash flow as a rental property, but you don't know how to structure the deals, or you want to know how something like this would work. And that's when I start working with wholesalers. Once they start seeing how the creative strategies work and how they can get paid on it, they start bringing me in. I also have wholesalers that will just give me their list and I'll pay them like a bird dog fee, like $500 or whatever, for every deal that I close. So there's different ways to work with your wholesalers. Do I work with any partners? You need to elaborate more what you mean by partners. I mean, I have private money partners all the time. We syndicate, we do lots of different things. So I would need to know what you mean by partners. I also have realtors that will bring me deals. And that's another good resource to use as well, is realtors that have problem properties. Because if a realtor has a property that won't sell, they're not getting paid. So think about that as well.
They can unmute now and ask you questions, Maria.
Okay. Yeah. So you guys can unmute yourself. So if you have any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Let me kind of elaborate on partners. So I guess that's why we call it JV, right? Because that's the nice thing, where you just do one property and you move on. So you're not married to the partner. So it's not, I mean, I wouldn't recommend partners. JV is good.
Yeah, besides JV, so I guess what I was focusing more was making maybe like on marketing partners. And I think you mentioned that you do work with individuals where they'll bring you the list, things like that. But do you ever have any other working arrangements with individuals where they might help you with, you know, either cold calling or certain other functions to kind of, you know, help with the volume?
Yeah, so I've worked with people who like love to go knock on doors. I am not somebody who loves to go out and knock on 1,000 doors. My husband will do that. No, thank you. That being said, the house I'm living in, we bought creatively, and I sent my husband door knocking. So I'll partner with somebody else who will do the door knocking for me. Cold calling, there are people out there that are fantastic on the phone, and I don't have time to do it. So I'm happy to partner with them. I have partnered with people who have come to me and said, "Hey, I have this deal. You know, can you help walk me through it," or partner that way. So I've done that kind of stuff. When you're looking at like for private money and stuff, those are my tenants in common deals, and that's where I put one private money lender per deal kind of stuff. If you're JVing with people, you have to make sure that they're doing some type of work. So if you're doing a joint venture, it can be somebody who is, you know, is going out there doing the management, or, you know, is contributing some way to the deal. So that's a great question.
What do realtors get from selling you a house, or how does it work? So
go ahead.
No, so you can make profit and they can make profit, or how are they making profit, period?
Well, a lot of times, you know, if a realtor is coming to me, they have a problem property that either the seller wants more than what it will sell for, and it's just sitting there. The seller might be a landlord, and I tell the realtor, hey, start talking to them about all the money they're going to be paying in taxes when they sell it. Because if they sell a property all cash, they're paying a lot of taxes, and the longer they've owned it for, the more they're going to be paying back in taxes. So if they're willing to, you know, if they want a little bit more, I can give them more for their property, but I've got to do it over time. And I will pay a realtor their commission for a good property. I have no problems doing that. It's just like a wholesaler. You know, a wholesaler wants to get paid. A realtor does as well. Sometimes you have realtors that might have situations where the property's in foreclosure and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to negotiate a short sale or whatever the situation may be. And that's where I'll step in. So I work with realtors all the time with that. Was there anything more specific, Abby, you wanted on that?
Well, I'm just thinking, because I've read a lot or heard a lot of things about using realtors, but realtors want what, 5 to 7%, or how much is a realtor fee right now?
You know, it varies from realtor to realtor. Now with the new NAR rulings and all that kind of stuff, it also depends on the seller. But if the realtor is having their listing and it's at 2.5% for the seller side, they're not getting their 2.5%. And I can say, well, do you want to get your 2.5%, or do you want to get nothing? You know, do you want to help this seller out? So that's what I've done. A lot of properties that have been sitting there on the MLS, you know, past 90 days, or, you know, the seller just, you know, they're stuck on their price, or maybe it's a property that has, you know, issues with it. We see a lot of structural issues where I am. I'm very good at structural issues. I have some really good people. I'm also a licensed general contractor. So I will take on the hard properties. And when you talk about partnering with people, that would be somebody good to partner with. Partner with somebody who knows if you've seen structural issues on properties, partner with someone, check them out. And if they understand structural issues, that's a good one, because we'll see properties that are falling out because of that. And, you know, the realtor is frustrated. The seller may not have the money to make the repairs, and it has to be disclosed. So those are good ones to work with the realtors on.
And for example, if it's a sub 2, the seller loses his equity, right?
Well, it all, not necessarily. Some sellers, the ones that I am doing the subject twos on, it's got to be a heck yes. And I will tell them right away that I should not be their first choice. I should be their last choice. And that they should list it. They should do all this other stuff. And in fact, what I'm doing, when I'm telling somebody they don't want you, they want you more. So you're kind of qualifying yourself by disqualifying. It's kind of weird the way that works. But in a subject to deals, we have gotten subject to deals that had a bunch of equity in it, but the seller was just done. If they have a bunch of equity in it too, you can do a wraparound mortgage where you're paying their bank financing on it, the existing finance, and then you have a second mortgage that's wrapping it, and you're paying the seller over time as well on their equity. So when it comes to the seller, I find out, you know, what is it you want? A lot of people think they need to have a pile of cash when in fact that creates problems. They don't want a ton of cash. So.
Thank you, Maria.
You're very welcome. Thanks. Any other questions on that?
So there's a question on how to pay realtor fees or commission, I guess, when they bring you a property.
So it depends on the realtor. I have realtors that will bring me off-market properties. And for most of them, you know, they'll want to get a couple percentage, 2.5%. If it's already listed, I'm not a realtor, by the way. If you are a realtor, you know, your commission can be put in there, because I have students that are realtors, and, you know, they get a commission when they buy the property as well. It goes back into their company, but it's negotiable. I believe in paying realtors for what they're doing, because they are providing a service. But also, if that property is sitting there, they're not getting paid. So, and I want realtors that are also friendly to investors, that understand what we're trying to do. So, yeah, and commissions are negotiable as well. So, and the other thing is that I see in there you put, do you ever get creative with wholesale fees or realtor commissions? Who says that you can't pay them over time as well? If you're putting a lot out on a property, maybe it's distressed, other things are going, you're covering closing costs. Who says that you can't pay that realtor's commission over time? So that's another strategy as well. So it is, as long as they have an open mind. So most of our realtors do pay up front. Oh, go ahead.
The mindset is just everything is negotiable. Don't put yourself in a square box.
Exactly. And you're going to learn right away. Don't be so sure of what you don't think somebody won't do or won't take. I have been surprised over and over, again and again, by people who I made an offer to or did something, and never in my wildest dreams did I think that they'd accept it. And they do. I mean, people aren't going to show you all of their cards at once. You know, it's like an onion. There's many, many layers to it. So.
Have you ever paid a wholesaler overtime?
Yeah, I have paid wholesalers over time. I've also converted a lot of wholesalers to basically they're selling it to me on a wrap, or doing like a wraparound mortgage with them. And by doing that, they are starting to get cash flow as well. And I start talking to them about, God, you know, it must be getting pretty hard these days to find good wholesale deals. You're always having to go out there and you know, eat what you kill, kind of thing. And they start, and that goes back to that negotiations, and they're like, oh my God, it's terrible. It's hard to get these prices, you know, all this, you know, stuff is going on. And I said, well, what if I can negotiate with the seller, and instead of paying you, $10,000, what if instead I pay you, $200 a month for X number of months, kind of stuff. And they're starting to think about it. And I started asking, what will that do for you, knowing that every month you'll have this cash coming in? But again, to do these properties, you have to make sure that they cash flow. And by cash flow, I mean more than $50 a month after your expenses. I want properties that are cash flowing $350, $500 or more a month. And that's my net, not gross.
Have you ever been able to negotiate with a wholesaler? When you look at paying the wholesale fee and then you're paying all of the closing costs, that gets to be fairly expensive. So have you ever negotiated those closing costs, or how would you do that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't always pay 100% of the closing costs either. It does depend on the deal. I've had sellers that I've taken over, they're note subject to, but they've had to come in with money. If the property is distressed, if I'm going to, if it's in the middle of winter where I'm at, it might sit there for a month or two or whatever. So I'm showing them, listen, these are my other costs. I get that you want your cake and eat it too, but I'm not going to take all the crumbs. So I've got to have a piece of that. So.
Okay.
And that's the beauty of it, is you can have a conversation with the wholesaler. You can have a conversation with the seller. It's a lot harder to have these conversations with a bank and say, hey, bank, do you mind if I give you no payments for, 6 months? Whereas if I'm dealing with a motivated seller, I can tell them, and even if they're upside down, we have done deals where they've had to contribute so much per month until we get that property stabilized. Now, that's much riskier for me to do that. But if it's a good asset, I can consider something like that. Brian, where you guys are in Texas, it's a lot harder to do lease options. But I have done master leases with investors, meaning sellers, where I'm not selling it to a tenant buyer. I'm basically master leasing it from a landlord to build their trust. And then I'm getting the cash flow of it every month. So there's different ways to do it as well. So that's the beauty of what we are. There's 1,000 different ways to do one deal. Okay, so Adam, you asked, do I have a certain target dollar amount I want on each deal? So when you're talking about cash flow, typically the least amount of cash flow net I'll take on a deal is $350. And it does depend on the property. If it's a more distressed property and I have to put more money in there, I want to get more cash flow on it. Every property, especially if you're doing a subject to deal, you have to have reserves on that property. Because if you can't get it rented, if something goes wrong, you have to be able to make those mortgage payments for that seller. So on subject tos and wraparound mortgages, any type of property, really, you need to have the reserves. And that's where partnerships can come in. If you're new to landlording, you can have a joint venture with somebody who's an experienced landlord and has those reserves. What are you getting? You're getting the experience, but what do you have that's valuable? You have the asset. So that's where you can work together. And that's where you can go to your REIA and say, hey guys, I've got this property. I'm about to take it down as subject to, or the seller has agreed to sell it on terms to me. I'm looking for an experienced buy and hold investor who can show me that they have the reserves to partner, to do a JV or whatever with that. So that's a great way to do it. And if you're a wholesaler, that's an excellent strategy. So does that help you guys?
Yeah. How do you explain the due upon sale clause and not scare the subject to seller off?
So most subject to sellers don't know about the due on sales clause. The key to doing your subject twos, though, are having all of your disclosures. And I'm upfront with them and I tell them, listen, over 99% of residential mortgages have this thing. It's called a due on sales clause. And it's where your bank, believe it or not, for anything can call your note due. This is how we mitigate, but this is why the banks don't want your property. And I explained to them why banks want payments, not properties. The other thing is that the banks have sold and resold most of these notes so many times. My husband and I, years ago, bought our residential property for us. And before we made our first payment, our note was sold 3 times. So when it came to making our mortgage payment, our first one, we didn't know who to make it out to. We had to call the first lender and be like, okay, who am I making this out to? So banks really do not want their properties back. They learned their lesson during the mortgage crisis, the meltdown, that they are horrible with properties, because some can argue that they're horrible with paper too, but they want those payments. What is going to get you in trouble? Well, not making the payment, making your payments late. Insurance. If you change the insurance on that property and you don't list the mortgage company or the lender as additionally insured, and that insurance, the first one, gets canceled, they'll call it. So there are certain things that if you don't do it in the right order, if you don't have the system and the checklist to do it, you can get those notes called due. So that's really important to know. What else? Yeah, and as my husband said, you know, every year we're raising our rents, and we're helping, you know, building our wealth faster. And it's, when you're looking at the strategies of real estate investing, honestly, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're doing it one property at a time, one house at a time. And these strategies also work very well in commercial, because we're doing them in commercial as well. And that's where a lot of your creative deal structuring originally came out of, was commercial. So,
I have a question about buying a property subject to when the original loan was a VA loan. Any special considerations on that?
Yeah. So one especially is not every, and you guys use title companies, correct? Not title attorneys. Yeah. Or yeah. Okay. So not every title company out there will do a sub-2 on a VA. Most will. The other thing is when we talk about disclosures, one of the disclosures I have for somebody with a VA loan is I'm sign a disclosure that say they may not be able to get another VA loan. It's based on a calculation. Some people can, some people can't. It all depends on their benefit. So I explain that to them. And again, I don't really like sub-2s on FHA and VAs, but if it's a great deal and the seller is really desperate and motivated, I might do it. Another thing that you hear people doing out in YouTube land and all that stuff, that's an absolute no-no, is when people are told to refinance or put it on the back and they're signing all these bank docs. In those bank docs, when they're doing it, they're stating that they are going to be living in that property for the next 12 months or for the next year and a day. If you are doing a subject to on that property, guess what? You guys just committed mortgage fraud. So in a situation like that, I'll probably master lease it from that seller for that year and then do a subject to. And that's really important to know. So.
Sorry, are you talking about like low mods and things like that?
Yeah. When you hear a lot of people out there in YouTube land that's telling people that, you know, maybe you miss 6 year payments, whatever, to do the loan mod, if it still cash flows, and buy it on a sub-2. If you're doing that, you guys are doing mortgage fraud. So I just want to get that out there so nobody does that.
I have a question on that. If you do a master lease for the 12 months, would you get a down payment up front, or you have to wait for your down payment until the master lease is done and then you do the sub-2?
So if I'm doing a master lease to the seller, I'm usually having as little as possible for consideration. So usually I'm not putting anything down, or I might be putting $100 down or $1,000 to pay on the property. And then I'm making sure I have an option to buy it within a certain period of time. And I put generally an extension on my option, because we never know what's going to happen. So that's how I do those. Does that help answer your question, Kay?
So you don't get any deposit. I mean, you don't get any down payment up front. You have to wait until that 12-month period is up, so it's not mortgage fraud?
Well, I'm not, so I wouldn't be, it would be the seller who would be getting a down payment or whatever. So they would be the one getting the consideration, not me.
Oh, okay, okay.
I would be re-renting that property out to a tenant, or, you know, or maybe I'm, well, you guys can't do, well, if you're in a state where you can do rent to own, then you can have an end buyer and that kind of stuff. Otherwise, in Texas, I think you guys have to have it refi within 6 months.
There's ways to do it, even though
Right.
they said it you can't, but there's, as long as you do the documents correctly.
Yeah, and the way I like to do those, if I'm in a place like Texas or whatever, I'm going to sell it on a wrap to a tenant buyer.
Well, the problem with that is a lot of these people doesn't have enough down payment.
Yeah, and you have to vet them. You have to really look at their financials, their ability to pay, and that's why people have gotten in trouble.
Yep. Okay, there's 2 questions in the chat.
Okay. Where am I? Okay. What recommendations do you have regarding calling agents about their property sitting? I call them and I try to get information. I'll ask them questions like, so it seems like a really great property. Why don't you think it is sold yet? You know, how can I help you make an offer on this property? You know, can you tell me what the seller is looking for? Many times I'll do the due diligence, or one of my staff will do the due diligence before they call, and we'll say, well, I've seen that they've owned it for, you know, the last 20 years. It seems like it's been a rental. And then I'll just ask a question, go silent. The key to really negotiating with people is you ask one question at a time and you stop. You go silent and you give the other party the opportunity to answer your question. You can't do them machine gun questions. And that's really key when talking with realtors. So I hope that helps a little bit. The homeowners have houses sitting without equity for high days on market, and agents are shutting every sub 2 down. Well, I don't go in and start talking sub 2 right away. And, you know, if they start shooting that down, I ask them, you've probably have seen a lot of scammy people who have probably done this, this, and this. And you're probably sick and tired of all of the dirtbag investors who it seems like they're just trying to steal your client's property. And basically what I'm doing is it's called an accusations audit on us as investors. And I might as well just go out there and spit out what they're already thinking, and let's talk about it. You know, let's not sugarcoat it. That's the best way to go about your negotiations.
I think Gary answered the next question on sublease.
Okay.
Or master lease.
Oh, what is a master lease? Okay, so Gary, you did answer that. Yeah, and master leasing is great when you have, and going back to the whole realtor thing, who isn't willing to do a sub 2, you can't force somebody to do something they're not interested in doing. And I'm going to tell you guys, I'm not a realtor. Have I gone around realtors and gone directly with their seller? Yep, because the realtor had a problem, the seller had a problem, needed to get rid of their property, and they weren't going to deliver my offer. So in that case, I have written or reached out to the seller directly, and I've gotten deals that way. Now, if you're a realtor, obviously you can't do that. But my workaround, if the realtor is adamantly against doing a sub 2 or whatever, or the seller is, I'll ask them, well, would you have anything against me leasing your property long term? And I just shut up and ask that question. And usually they're like, well, what do you mean? And so that's how I'll get them into doing the master lease, where I can then basically have a long-term lease. And master leases are also great if you're not sure you want a property. Do a master lease for a year or 2, see if you like that. But then I'll turn around and I'll have an option on there to buy it. And many times we start building trust with that seller. They're seeing that I'm paying them month after month. They're seeing that I'm taking care of their property. And that's how I get them to doing a subject to or seller carryback. Do I pay for inspection? Well, yeah, if I'm going to have the property inspected, absolutely. And I recommend everybody gain inspections on your property. I may not do it if it's a master lease. And that goes back to that I'm going to try it kind of thing. But if I'm going to buy that property, yeah, I'm going to do an inspection on it because people can hide a lot of stuff. So I would definitely get an inspection done, even if you're buying the property subject to. I mean, if you're buying it subject to and the electrical is bad, that's a lot of money that you have to put into that property. If that roof is bad and you have to replace a $10,000 roof, but you're only making $400 or $500 cash flow a month, ouch, that's going to hurt you over time. Yeah, so there's your typical closing expenses with the subject to, just like any other closing. You're always going to do a title search. You're always going to close with the title company. You want to find out what other liens are on those properties. We have had properties that we were looking at buying creatively, and we found like over $150,000 child support lien. I can negotiate with the IRS. That person that's owed $150,000 child support, not so easy to negotiate. That will stick with that property. Child support liens do not go away. We had another property recently that we were working on that was a probate that at one point, but the probate was never paid. That was over $4,000 that was owed. People think when a property goes to foreclosure or whatever, even if it's a probate, that the inheritance gets wiped out. That stuff, the inheritance taxes in many states does not get wiped out. So that's where doing the title search and your proper paperwork comes in. Insurance, I always switch it to my insurance. And I don't have problems. I always make sure that I list the lender as additionally insured, or if it's a straight out, you know, the seller might be a lender. I think that's it. The one other thing I didn't have much of a time, and I know we're running out of time here real quick. The third thing I wanted to tell you guys that I'm having great success with is social media, finding properties through Facebook Marketplace, buy, sell, trade groups, your local community garage sales groups, that kind of stuff. I'm having great success with that, and I don't do paid ads. So when we can talk more about that, maybe Tuesday or Saturday as well. But any other questions? Because I know we're right at the 9 o'clock hour. When I come to speak, you know, for you know, San Antonio, and then in at the AlamoREIA, and then at the Greater Houston REIA, I'm going to be covering again a little bit on the negotiations. We're going to talk about, you know, your seller avatar and how you negotiate to create the deal that the seller will say yes to. How you find what their problems are, what their pain points are. And again, we're going to give you my high converting direct mail marketing piece to really help you jumpstart that. So I want to be able to give you something that you can take away and implement right away. And there really is 3 things that to be a great or even just a good real estate investor, you've got to have your marketing. You've got to be able to negotiate with the seller, and then you have to be able to structure those deals. So those are the 3 things I'm really going to be nailing down next week when I come. So again, you know, click on the links that we have in the chat box. I hope to see you next week and give you all that marketing and answer any more questions you guys have. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Thank you, Maria.
You're very welcome.
Really good.
So I've pasted the link, so please register so you can get the full speech, and either Tuesday or Saturday.
Yep, absolutely. Looking forward to being with you guys and answering all your questions and giving you my marketing stuff.
All right.
All right. Yeah. So if y'all can just get pre-registered, that will help us out very much. One last thing, if everybody can unmute themselves and give Maria a big round of applause. That was lots of gold tonight.
Thank you.
And tell everybody that was not on the call tonight what they missed and that they need to be at the meeting on either Tuesday or Saturday.
Hey, they only missed that one thing that could have made all the difference.
Yes.
The nugget.
The nuggets.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys for being here. We definitely look forward to seeing you on Tuesday and Saturday. Again, please get pre-registered. That helps everybody out. And then as far as our preparation and everything, and then we will see y'all then. Thank you again, Maria.
Thank you. I appreciate
you,
all of you.
everyone.